Hello everybody. So Saylor's back again. It's that time of the week where he tells us he's going to buy. He flashed the buy card, right? This is what he flashes on Twitter on Sundays. He's relentless and he's going to be buying tomorrow. I don't know what it's going to be. I want to point out, though, that Bitcoin, is just consolidating its status as a stable coin by now. I mean, it's 84,351, and it was 84,245 exactly 7 days ago. So, interestingly, MicroStrategy is up. It's up 2%. If you look at the 5 days, which would include the prior Fridays, it's up 12%. But it's up 2%. So the point I'm trying to make is that MicroStrategy is a stock that has one leg in TradFi, one leg in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is roughly flat, but TradFi was doing way better, right? This past week, these past 4 trading days, the market kind of recovered, kind of slowly went back up. And so, of course, the TradFi leg of MicroStrategy has been doing well, which leads me to think, because in the grand scheme of things, plus 2% is not that much of a performance. So this leads me to think that he probably ATM'd, right? He probably ATM'd quite a bit. So I don't know. We'll see what's going to happen tomorrow. We'll see how much he bought of Bitcoin, of course. But you can see the price to NAV is healthy at a 1.88. It's healthy. I was going back for my former slides when this stock was trading at 1.45. So we're getting back to that positive sentiment on the stock, to that healthy price to NAV, which is why I think he ATM'd quite a bit. Anyways, the earnings are coming up soon as well for MicroStrategy, so we'll get to know more. You may remember this video, though, about MicroStrategy that I did where I crowned him the king of sandbagging. This is him sitting on sandbags. He's the king of sandbag because on February 5th, 2025, in his investor presentation of February 5th, 2025, he gave us guidance. He gave us outlook of a 15% Bitcoin yield. And the joke, I mean, this is a complete joke, because now on 4/14/2025, so as of last week, we had 11.4% Bitcoin yield. 2 big weeks. If tomorrow is a big week, and if the week after is a big week of buys, we may be at 15% already, right? Tomorrow, if he announces a big buy, keeping in mind that the buy last week was a small buy, if he announces a big buy tomorrow, are we going to be at 13% tomorrow? And then the week after, maybe we're at close to 15%. So that would mean that the annual target, he could potentially achieve the annual target of 15% yield in one quarter, in a single quarter, or close to it, right? Because that quarter is technically close, but close to it. And it's pretty darn amazing. So he's the king of sandbag. I don't believe a single bit that he's going to be doing only 15% Bitcoin yield this year. I think he's going to do much more. In fact, I think he's going to do 37%. That's kind of what I deduce from the trend and the direction. I think he's going to do 37% Bitcoin yield this year in 2025. And of course, I repeat myself, but the point of an educational video is repetition is key to learning, etc. So I repeat myself. Why would one be interested in MicroStrategy versus interested in just buying Bitcoin? Well, today, if you spend $84,000 on Coinbase and you get your Bitcoin on Coinbase and you move it to like a hardware wallet or something, you have your 1 Bitcoin today. This is year 0, and then at the end of year 10, you also have 1 Bitcoin. On the other hand, if you buy Bitcoin in the form of MicroStrategy share, you put 84,000 into MicroStrategy. Today you get what? You get only 0.55 Bitcoin. That's what you get today. 0.55 Bitcoin. But if he actually achieves 37% yield going forward, right, this next 12 months, 37% yield, you get 0.76. And then let's assume the year after is 25%, you get a 0.95. So you get to your 1 Bitcoin anywhere between year 2 and year 3. At this rate of Bitcoin yield. And so you could potentially end up with much more Bitcoin over the long term by investing in a company that just buys Bitcoin on your behalf and generates the yield of a BTC yield on your behalf. And this is the magic of this stock. This is, Saylor, MicroStrategy, they're a Bitcoin treasury company. Their job is to issue equity That's the big one, right? That's the big way he's been issuing yield. Contrary to popular belief on MicroStrategy that it's a leveraged play on Bitcoin, I hate to hear that. It's mostly an ATM story. It's mostly a story of printing MicroStrategy shares at a price of $1.88. You print MicroStrategy shares at a price of $1.88, and you collect that 88 cents and you turn it into Bitcoin, and you actually only have $1 of dilution. You have $1 of dilution, and that dollar of dilution gives you $1.88 of Bitcoin. So that delta between $1.88 and $1 is your yield, and that's mostly been the MicroStrategy story. The job has been providing equity, right? MSTR equity, but of course he sees himself as a Bitcoin investment bank. There's no other way to say it. And what is a Bitcoin investment bank? Well, what does he do? He issues Strike. Strike preferred, right? The preferred stock, the income preferred stock with a infinity call option embedded in it, right? He issues Strife, the 10% preferred, without anything but the backing of Bitcoin on the balance sheet, which, if you believe in Bitcoin, is a really, really big deal because, do you want to buy treasuries at 4.5%? Do you trust that the U.S. government will always pay, right? The reason why the U.S. government is not treated AAA anymore as far as the credit rating goes is because every other year Congress threatens to not raise the debt ceiling, right? So do you want to buy in a risk-free instrument, supposedly, where every other year you have to worry about a political battle where they say they don't want to raise the debt ceiling, right? This is kind of an important fact, right? That's what Elon Musk, I remember a few quarters ago, Elon Musk said, jokingly about the bonds, right? One of the leading CEOs of our time says, "Oh, we'll see how risk-free really is." It really is, joking about how many billions, dozens of billions Tesla has in government bonds, right? Because every 2 years, anyway. That was a tangent. The point is, for Strife, right? They issue Strife, they issue Strike, so these are preferred. They issue convertibles, and they issue common stock. So you have 4 instruments that MicroStrategy distills and sells to the market. So this stock is much closer to an investment bank. They're a Bitcoin treasury company. They issue derivatives on Bitcoin. And why do I spend a little time talking about that? Is because I have my MSTR new thought on the week, and of course, MicroStrategy being my largest position, I think a lot about MicroStrategy, and I never miss a podcast from Saylor. This is the block. If you go on the block, this is the latest podcast for Saylor. I recommend it. It's a great podcast. Anyways, if you look in the middle, this is not the first time I hear Saylor this. Now it's been multiple podcasts where I hear Saylor this. Go on minute 24 in this podcast. What does Saylor tell you? It could do this. It tells you that the converts, the preferreds, the debt, he could do this in Canadian dollars. He could do this in euros. He could do this in yens, right? And so what does that mean? That means that the next step, in my view, for MicroStrategy, and maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year, I don't know, but I think one of the next steps for MicroStrategy is to issue a European version, a Canadian version, and maybe even a Japanese version of the preferred, of Strike, of Strife, of the converts, of why not regular, straight, normal bonds, like some of the older issuance that he has on MSTR, and maybe even equity, right? Maybe even equity. Why not, right? Cross-listed equities are a thing. I would have no problem imagining him cross-listing MSTR equity on other exchanges. And I think that's going to be one of his next steps to raise more money, to earn more BTC yield in the coming years, is going to be to issue those same very successful equities that have been in the US, very successful bonds, very successful converts, the most successful convert, in fact, as he points out, and the preferred, which are on their way of also being very successful. I think is going to take that playbook and go international with that playbook and issue those same securities abroad. So then that would be MicroStrategy is closer to an international investment bank, and it makes sense because Bitcoin is an international asset. And of course, the question is, does it make sense to issue debt instruments in EU, in Canada, in Japan? And the answer to that is, you bet it does. I remember through the 2010s when there was a wave of years where Europe had negative interest rates. I remember a bunch of US REITs that had nothing to do with Europe, that never invested a penny in Europe. They were issuing bonds in Europe because they were able to score some negative interest rate bonds in Europe. I remember so distinctly. Anyways, same Procter and Gamble. I remember a lot of old world companies were all about, oh yeah, we're just going to issue debt in Europe and do some buybacks on the stock, and the debt was like near zero interest rate. So yeah, you can borrow dirt cheap in Europe, and frankly, I know a lot of my viewers disagree about that, but the leaders of the central banks of Canada and the leaders of the central bank of the Eurozone are, in my view, so much smarter than our unelected geriatric leader of the US central bank, in my view. That's just my view. You don't have to agree, because they've dropped their interest rates. They've stopped bluffing in the Eurozone. They've stopped bluffing in Canada, right? And us in the US at great cost to companies who, they can't wait. These companies can't wait, right? They're going to go into insolvency. Cities, households, states are going into, forget about insurance companies. They're going into car companies, debt companies. They're going into insolvency because we have a leader at the Fed that's so gung-ho about, I don't know, saving the dollar or denying the state of the economy, that is just keeping the rates flat. This is so crazy. So right before the election, you drop the rates, and then we haven't had a rate drop, while you guys in Europe and in Canada have had plenty of rate drops to support our economy. So you bet, in my view, when I look at Saylor, you bet he's looking at Europe and he's looking at Canada with a kind eye, because over there they're moving in the right way. Now, he also mentioned Japan. Japan is also moving in the wrong direction, raising the rates. Anyways, I don't know what Japan is doing, but I think EU and Canada is going to be a big deal for Saylor. And so if he chooses like a form of preferred, if he chooses that over there, I think that's going to be the next step. And that's not the first time he says that. So I think we're going to have some example of that in the future. Anyways, let me conclude this video quickly with a quick note on Semler. Many of you have asked me about Saylor. And you know that I was wary on Saylor. I was worried about that DOJ investigation. And I like it again now. Why? Because they have settled with the DOJ. And so when you settle, it's just, instead of finding out whether you're right or wrong, you just pay money to move on. And that's what Semler seems to have done. They've paid money to move on because they don't want to have that investigation weigh on the stock for years to come. And so anyways, it doesn't matter. The investigation was about marketing claims of overcharging for the QuantaFlo device. By the way, a lot of medical companies were investigated for claims of overcharging. So, I guess we'll know in a few years whether companies that didn't settle actually, were overcharging or not, and how the lawsuits against these companies went. Because, like I said, that DOJ probe was for a lot of equipment providers. I think more than a dozen, actually, of equipment providers were in that probe. But Semler is like, okay, no, I'm not gonna do it. My QuantaFlo. You're attacking my QuantaFlo. I'm not gonna do it. There you go, $29.75 million. We settle. They settled, and they settled with a Coinbase loan. They're gonna pay it with a Coinbase loan, because that's the beauty of Bitcoin, right? When you have 3,192 Bitcoin at Coinbase, because Coinbase is, of course, the institutional custodian, it's very easy for them to say, okay, well, we're going to pledge 20%, 30%, whatever. Well, in that case, it would be like 15%, I guess, in that case. Well, we're going to pledge 15% of that Bitcoin, and we're going to give you a loan against that Bitcoin. Maybe they pledged a little more. It doesn't really matter. It's a good thing that they're settling, and I think that sentiment is gonna stop weighing on the stock now. The stock actually was up 5% after hours, so keep in mind this number is slightly higher now. The point is, you're looking at a company, Semler Scientific, who is now 86% Bitcoin. The price to NAV is getting good, and 1.16, and if the stock shoots back up, which I think it will, I think that price to NAV will be even more favorable to do things like issue new equity to buy Bitcoin and to generate the yield. And you understand, of course, that wouldn't be very good right now if Semler sold new shares, because it's 1.16. So you sell $1 for $1.16. You don't earn as much yield as MicroStrategy selling $1 for $1.88. But if the stock price recovers, I see common stock issuance for Semler being highly accretive, and they have a mixed offering here, right? So mixed securities offering, which means that they're going to do also some debt, some common stocks, a very, very flexible offering. It's about raising the funds, raising 500 million in order to, fully follow the Bitcoin strategy as a backing of their QuantaFlow device. And the QuantaFlow device is, of course, not getting reimbursed anymore. And so you are in a situation where I've highlighted many times is the CMMS, it's Medicare, who's essentially deciding who lives and who dies. And every year, Medicare decides that a few companies are going to die. And last year, unfortunately for Semler was elected. You've been elected to die because for some reason somebody at Medicare said, okay, well, we're not gonna pay for your product, and they're only left with private clinics who still see value with the product, knowing that because of my, and I'll say this for comments, I usually get comments in these videos, because of my female significant other, I know a little bit about QuantaFlow. She used QuantaFlow for many years at her clinic, and until they stopped reimbursing it, and once they stopped reimbursing it, now they have a medical assistant do the the acrobronchial test. Now they have a medical assistant do the test with the hand like it's the 1940s, because Medicare doesn't reimburse it anymore. But peripheral heart disease is a disease which there's two ways to detect it. There's QuantaFlow, which was, in her view, and based on everything I read, a much better way to actually quantify whether someone has PAD, but it was close to $200 or something like that for Medicare. And Medicare was like, okay, well, we're not going to pay for this device because you can just have a medical assistant do the test like it's the 1940s, because humans never ever make any mistakes, and machines, make a lot of mistakes. Humans never ever make any mistakes, especially medical assistants. They never make mistake. So that's the Medicare thinking on this, and that's why the device didn't get reimbursed. Of course, Semler, they're spending a lot of money on R&D right now. They're doubling down on the studies to try to go back to the process. And you publish studies and you say, hey, look, actually my device works. My device is better. And then you go through the whole process with a contractor who looks at the device and is like, okay, the device is better. The device is better. And now you get into pricing and all that sort of stuff. It's a tough industry. But Semler Scientific, the head of Semler, that was founded by his dad. His dad was a heart surgeon. Anyways, that's a family business technically. I get a good feeling about this one. I don't know. Sometimes you can't explain. I get a good feeling about this one, but I don't need to get a good feeling or a bad feeling. I really don't need to, because I can just look at the numbers. And when I look at the numbers, $310 million, that's the market cap. That's the price, right? So we're not going to use EV because I don't have time today. That's the price, $310 million. And it's $369 million worth of Bitcoin. So that means that your Bitcoin adjusted market cap is 41 million is your Bitcoin adjusted market cap. What do you think happens if the winds were to blow on BTC? Right? We get a little bit of a sentiment shift, and BTC goes back to 97,000 or 98,000. What do you think happens? Well, all of a sudden you end up with a company with a negative price. If Bitcoin rises 14%. I'm simplifying the math here. But if Bitcoin rises just a little bit, just a little wind on Bitcoin, this company, if it doesn't move, if the stock price doesn't move, this company ends up having a negative enterprise value and enters the club of, say, a CleanSpark, who's nearly there. So I consider this company almost as cheap as a CleanSpark, almost as cheap as a Mara, with an important distinction, which is they have an actual business. They have an actual solid business with a medical device. If you look at that stock price, actually in the early days of the channel, I had covered Semler for that medical device because they had explosive revenue growth. I had covered it before they even talked about Bitcoin, and their product was a blockbuster product. It's just that when you're a blockbuster product, what's going to happen is that Medicare is going to notice you and it's going to be like, okay, well, you cost us a lot of money. So we're gonna stop covering it, and that's kind of, you know, that's a double-edged sword. But if you look at the revenue growth trajectory of QuantaFlo, the device, that was a blockbuster medical device, which is why I had covered this stock before, when it was, you know, before the MSTR days. Anyways, the point is, what's the price? What's the BTC adjusted price to EBITDA? Well, the BTC adjusted price to EBITDA is a 2.8x. LOL, as we say, right? It's a joke. This company is trading at less than 3 times cash flow. EBITDA is my proxy for cash flow. Okay, the revenues are declining a little bit, but, you know, that's what happens when Medicare does this to you. That's what happens. And, you know, you got to look at that. The revenues are declining, but that's because they're you know, they're only private right now. They're only private pay clients who do it. But my guess is this product's not dead. This product was a blockbuster product once, and it's very high chances that it could become a blockbuster product again. That's point number one. But then point number 2, you don't need to take a chance because this stock is so cheap. So I'm a little bullish on Semler, and I'm gonna be looking at this stock. And of course, if and when I buy, I post it on Patreon as I always do. So this was not investment advice, not financial advice, just entertainment. Please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.